Thanks for joining us another episode in Tea and Trowels, FPAN's web series featuring conversations with archaeologists. Today we're joined with Liz Quinlan. Would you like to introduce yourself and your mug?
Sure. My name, as you said, is Liz Quinlan. I'm a zooarchaeologist. I'm currently living in York, England. So it's 7 o'clock at night here, which is great. And I am drinking tea, even though it's 7 o'clock, but it's chamomile because I couldn't do the whole proper Yorkshire brew this late. So this is my mug. This is actually made by my cousin. She is a potter who lives in Cape Run, Illinois. Headwaters Pottery is her Etsy shop. And she is my maternal cousin, and I've wanted one of her mugs or like potted things for a long time, but I just never had the money. And then once I did finally have the money, I lived in England. And so finally I just for Christmas was like, I'm going to suck it up. I'll pay this postage, and, you know, paid like way more than it shouldn't have been, but it's my cousin. I don't care. But yeah, so she makes like stoneware, hand thrown pottery, mostly mugs. And she also makes like cool yarn bowls and stuff. And so yeah, this was the mug I decided on, or rather my partner decided on, because I couldn't decide. Too many good mugs.
Yes, I love it. Like I've told every time on these interviews, I'm running out of mugs. So again, an Etsy find, Scrimshaw Pottery, because I might have a problem with collecting pottery by local art folks. So I might have to check out your cousin's shop and see what I can.
It's never a problem.
Right, it's not. You can always use a good mug, especially like the good sturdy ceramic ones. Like there's something better about like a nice hand thrown mug, and it's nice and thick and it feels good in your hands. Like you need to have that good like cradle.
Yeah. Also I also forgot to mention, these are cornflowers, because she does native plants most of the time. But because her husband is a prairie restoration ecologist, and they own like a mini prairie in the middle of Illinois, and she's just so cool. She's a geologist and like also makes pot, like just so cool. But she has some Star Trek themed ones as well, and a bunch of other stuff. So.
Our conversation before this, I already said Emily Jane was going to be jealous, but now she's going to be even more jealous. She's the biggest Trekkie I have ever met. So yeah, we're definitely going to have to be checking out her shop and to maybe feature on another Tea and Trowels. Her mugs are going to show up because we always could use more mugs. All right. So our first question right off the bat is, how did you get into archaeology?
So there's like a joking answer and a real answer to that. So the joking answer, that is like my quick answer, is that I was studying anthropology, and then I realized I didn't have the patience to deal with interviewing live people. And so that's like the joke, but kind of serious. But I was studying cultural anthropology in like I'd always been interested in history and classics. Like as a kid, I was that kid who was given like books on ancient Egypt and Greece for like every like occasion, and I loved them. I ate them up. And I in high school took like a local community college course on cultural anthropology, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, and kind of it went from there. But when I first started college, I was actually studying English with a concentration in screenwriting for theater, or playwriting. So I was not really doing anthropology, but I did a minor, and what really like clicked with me first was I took a bioanthropology and bioarchaeology course, and I really, really loved it. So then a whole bunch of stuff happened, and I eventually transferred from that college to the University of Toronto, which is where I did my bachelor's. And while I was transferring, I just was like, I think I want to do archaeology. That sounds cooler. And maybe more profitable. No, it's between theater and archaeology. They're both bad choices if you're going along the good bad capitalism route. But so I switched my major to archaeology. I was very, very interested in like Paleolithic stuff. That was what I really wanted to do. Human origins. And while I was at U of T, I was exposed to, this wide variety of archaeological contexts, because they've got people working on, lower Paleolithic South Africa, as well as historic Ontario. So big variety, lots of stuff. And I eventually found myself in Max Friesen's faunal osteoarchaeology course. And I was like, wait, you can do animal bones too? Which appeared to have awoken something in me, because I was like a little not into, like, I took human osteology and I was like, okay, this is fine, it's cool, but I don't know. But then animal bone stuff was just really cool to me. And when I was a little kid, I really wanted to be a vet. So I was just like, this is kind of coming full circle. This feels right. And that was my first introduction to zooarchaeology. And that's what I do now. I finished at U of T, then I did a master's in historical archaeology at UMass Boston. That was on a zooarchaeological project. And now I'm at the University of York doing my PhD. That was a long answer.
No, it was a perfect answer, because I have so many things I can comment on. Most of all, the fact that I feel like we all just need to be really close friends, because the veterinarian track to Zoark is Emily Jane's husband, John Simon Suarez, who now works for the Army Corps. That was his track, his vet tech, and went into Zoark. So
I went to vet camp as a kid, because I grew up in Massachusetts, and Tufts School of Veterinary Medicine is like, huge, amazing vet school. And they do, I think they still do it, like Adventures in Veterinary Medicine every summer. And it was just like a 2-week camp. And I got to learn how to vaccinate sheep and tell if a cow was pregnant and go into anatomy and physiology lab. And it was so cool. And yeah, that was the kind of kid I was.
Yeah. I think we're all kind of those kids. And I also just like the fact that within just the field of like archaeology, there's so many similarities that we can do our own little anthropological analysis of how people get into archaeology, because I feel like most of the approaches are the same, or they all have like the same childhood interests. Like I was definitely given all the history books, and it's like, I feel like there's people who are like, there's the dinosaur sides where every kid is like horrifically obsessed with dinosaurs, or there's the side that like they're really obsessed with these like nuanced historical rock collecting things. And
see, weirdly, I also was into dinosaurs, but I I took out this book when I was in kindergarten, and I don't have very many like vivid childhood memories because I'm, old, and I have these vivid memories of getting told off by the librarian for taking out a book on dinosaurs for like the 20th time in a row, because I would just take it out and read it and pore over it, and I just loved it. And I would read it to my sister, who was younger than me, and she couldn't run away. And I just, like, one of my vivid childhood memories is just being like, Liz, you can't take this out again. I just was like, but I want it.
Oh, it would break my heart.
I was always getting yelled at by librarians. I always took out too many books.
Yeah. That would be the same. And not having enough in the kids section, going to like the adult section, being told like that's not your reading level, and just being like, no, I want to read this one. And that's what I'm going to take home. I'm going to figure it out. So continuing on, what is your current research?
Yeah, so I have prepped my 30-second research summary. So I'll do that, and then we can kind of go from there. So I studied the exploitation of Atlantic salmon across the North Sea Basin area during the medieval period from about 500 to 1500 CE. So salmon were culturally and economically important fish during the medieval period in a variety of different societies, but their bones are quite rare on archaeological sites. And even then, we can't necessarily tell if salmonid bones are from Atlantic salmon or brown trout. So in order to try and understand more about the presence and absence of and geographic origins of salmon during medieval time periods, I'm using zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry for species identification and stabilized isotope analysis for environmental information.
Round of applause. That was,
Thank you.
I could never get the elevator pitches down, and that was beautiful. That was so perfect.
I've written that boilerplate, so I've had to apply for so many. I'm trying to get like samples right now, so I have written this over and over, like, this is my project, this is what I'm doing, please give me the bones, let me destroy them. So that's what I do all the time now.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you to elaborate, and since this is, you just said it, you're going to destroy the bones. So what analyses you're doing? Isotopic, and I don't remember the other one. So how will it get processed?
So zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry. So basically, this project is part of a Marie Curie ITN. So it's an innovative training network. It's a European-based project, and it's funded by European Research Council. Should know that. And so there's 15 of us who are PhD students, and we're working on 15 projects that that connect in different ways. They're all about marine exploitation of marine species across like a massive time depth. So I'm working on salmon. There's a couple people working on hake and cod, and someone's doing scrimshaw studies, which you mentioned about your mug. My friend Laura, who's at Cambridge, is doing scrimshaw stuff, and it's just very cool. We've also got sea turtles and walruses and whales, just everything. And one of the kind of best parts of it is that it's not just archaeologists, it's also marine biologists and conservation ecologists and ichthyologists. And we come from massively different backgrounds, and we all get to work together, which is very cool. But so my specific project is a zooarchaeology based one, which is why I, got this one as opposed to the ancient DNA projects that are going on, because I know nothing about those. But yeah, at the moment, I'm running a pilot study on material from the site located in York, conveniently. It's called Coppergate, and it's like a really famous Anglo-Saxon site, and I use air quotes because Anglo-Saxon is not a real thing. It's no person who has been called an Anglo-Saxon in modern times would ever call themselves that, because they most likely would have just identified with whatever local cultural group name that they use, like Mercian or something like that. But it is unfortunately the group word that tends to get thrown around. So Coppergate is a Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Scandinavian site. So you've got Norse influences and Saxon and Angles and Normans later, and it's a really amazing complex site. And it has quite a lot of salmon bones, unlike most other sites in Europe. It's weird, and we don't quite know why, and kind of part of what I'm looking at is why this is at the preservation issue. Because sites that have really excellent preservation for like every other fish just have no salmon bones. And it's been kind of like posited, oh, maybe it's because they have a really high fat content, but you've got fish like herring that are very oily fish, and those are fine. So those preserve. So it's weird, and that's why I'm intrigued about it. So what I am mostly focused on right now is using Coppergate as this pilot study to look at ways of differentiating between salmon and trout, because even though they are skeletally pretty much identical, they were valued very differently in terms of cultural value and economic value. Like trout was kind of garbage fish, and anyone could fish it, whereas at different time periods during the medieval and during the medieval period, so between 500 to 1500 CE, and in different, well, they weren't countries, but like in different cultural groups and societies, people introduced laws restricting the ability to fish salmon. They changed taxes on them to make it extremely expensive to fish them or to sell them, because we suppose, and we assume from records, there was this kind of decline in them. And people just really loved salmon. It tastes better. It has a better texture. It's a very prized fish, and it's always been culturally valued in wherever in the world that salmonids are. Salmon, whether it's Pacific or Atlantic, has kind of deep and long time depth of meaning to people. And while there's been a lot of work in the Pacific Northwest looking at indigenous perspectives on Pacific salmon, no one has really done an overview of Atlantic salmon's importance and declines and the changes over time in the medieval period, because that's kind of the height of when it was really just like a thing. Like, I mean, people obviously still love salmon today, and that's why one of my project partners is the Atlantic Salmon Trust. And so the idea is that I'm working with a modern conservation organization as well as doing archaeological work.
Oh, that's awesome. I think it would be useful because we did a lot with like climate, seeing how people have adapted to climate pressures in the past and to use that for future studies or analyses. We're going to jump ahead and go into your favorite field tool. So what's your favorite field tool and perks if you do have it?
So I took this as, instead of field tool, as tool, because it does, in your email, you said, what's your favorite tool in your toolkit? And
Yes.
my favorite tool in my toolkit is Twitter. So I am active on Twitter quite a lot. But it's how I network, and it's how I ask for help, and how I make connections and share information. It's actually how I got my current job, my PhD position. So I consider social media to be a tool, and I try to use it as effectively as possible. And other than social media, my favorite tool is probably pasture pipettes, because they're just fun to use. And I have very little wet chemistry lab experience, and so I now am like obsessed, because now I'm actually doing chemistry lab stuff. They've allowed me into the chem lab, and that was a mistake. So but they're just like the glass pipettes, the short ones, and you put like a little squeegee rubber thing on top, and they're just fun to use. And when I got the hang of it, I was just like, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It's just very fun.
I was gonna say, you're actually right. I was blurring together two questions. So it is whatever your general tool is. Because we've had folks before say like, our own ability as archaeologists to be able to adapt. So like our human brain is the best tool, or down to other kind of not fieldwork tools like a trowel or shovel or basic.
Meanwhile, I'm over here like, no thoughts, head empty, Twitter. That's my favorite
No,
tool.
Twitter is how we found you. Like Sarah had, I think she was following you and talking with you on social media or Twitter. And then that's how we get onto this. We did a conference all on Twitter about tea and
Yep.
trowels, and we got two other folks from Twitter. So yeah, it's a great networking tool. It's one that I am not good at using. I never got into Twitter at the time. So I just stick with the Instagram. And that's just because I have to manage all the work accounts.
Yeah, that's valid.
But yeah, I think social media is phenomenal, and especially going in the virtual realm, we're able to communicate so much better. I mean, this is going on social media. This will go out, and then we'll talk to a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I think is, it kind of gives you that like little bit of like informal like in, where you might not have met someone before, but if you kind of follow them on Twitter, they might have seen you on Twitter or seen your stuff. Like when you do meet at a conference, it's slightly less awkward than it normally is. So like I've like gone out to people and be like, hey, I'm Liz, and they're like, oh yeah, I follow you on Twitter. Like I'm like, yeah, I follow you. Like, okay, cool. And that way, I mean, people like that, like now I don't, it doesn't feel as awkward. And I mean, my current supervisors, my PhD supervisors are David Orton, who's my he's the zooarch PI, so he's kind of like my main PI. He followed me, we've been following each other on Twitter for several years, and before I even was going to apply for this position. So now I'm here and he can't get rid of me.
I love it. There's actually, I sent an email the other day and I was like, this is awkward. Longtime follower, first time emailer, like how you would call into a radio show. Cause I've been like engaging so much on social media and just by following and like liking and whatnot. And so it felt so easy to email. At the same time, I was like, we haven't actually ever had a one-on-one conversation. So let me just like make this even more like awkward and out front and be like, yeah, hey, what's up? I think it's,
well, I think it's also been something that like because I've been, I hate like digital native, like I've been on, that's such a weird phrase, but like because I've just been very online for my whole childhood, possibly too much online for some of my childhood. I have always kind of had friends who were in different places or were, like hadn't met yet. And back in ye old Tumblr days, that was when I really started like actually getting into anthropology and archaeology was on Tumblr. And that was, I actually presented a paper at TAG North America a year ago about that, about the fact that like being on Tumblr is what kind of contributed some of the most to my theoretical development as an archaeologist.
that sounds like a really great read, not gonna lie.
I'm thinking about writing it up. It's like in the back of my head, and I need to write it. It just exists as weird slides right now.
Yeah, that's fine. Weird slides are good until you have to sit down and make something of it. Keep a lot of things as weird collections of thoughts and slides and notes that I'll write this up someday. Probably not, but it's okay.
Endless Google Drive folders full of like scraps of writing that I'm like, that's going to be a paper.
One day. So our next question is, what is your best, worst field story? So those ones that you can laugh about now.
There's several options. One is a little more actually dangerous than others, and it shouldn't reflect badly on the PA. So I'll tell it, but it's so I did my undergraduate field work at a cave site somewhere in Eastern Europe. And I just don't want the PS to get in trouble. I don't think they will, but it was an honest mistake. It was in Serbia. So it was a Paleolithic, Shalatrena, fantastic cave site, really cool. And it was like an awesome experience as like a first excavation experience, just so cool. We just got thrown right in, just like learn on the go, great. But unfortunately, one thing that happened was, so we had a generator set up in the cave. Otherwise we would not have light for half the day because it had a limestone overhang. So there was light in the mornings, but not in the afternoon, and especially because we were excavating in the back as well. So we had a generator and we had to carry everything there every day because unfortunately we couldn't leave it there because people did know that we were working in there. And, you know, hey, if you need a generator, just go nick one from the silly archaeologists. So we, you know, that was like an experience. Like we had to carry like the generator like to camp every day. So we like went like through an orchard, climb over a barbed wire fence, walk through a pig field, around a hillside, like sheep were there, down the hill, ford the river on foot, and then scramble up the cliff face to get to the cave. So like that was like the fun part, and then you like actually start working. But because of that, we had to bring gasoline for the generator every day, or kerosene. I don't remember what it was using. And the unfortunate choice of vessel to carry that in was large, like 2-liter water bottles. And they were all stored like in the back, like next to the generator. But unfortunately, one day someone had put them over where the 2-liter water bottles of water were. They were right next to each other. And, you know, it was dark in the cave, and not one, not two, but 3 separate people drank gasoline, immediately realized, and like spat it out and was like, like, you know, rinsing their mouths out. And we like moved everything afterwards, and we were like, maybe we should like get not water bottles. We started using Coke bottles instead of water bottles. And so we knew that the Coke bottle was the gasoline or the fuel. But so that was like not great. And then the worst part was that one of my colleagues on site, like after the drinking gasoline incident, immediately went to smoke a cigarette. And he was fine. Like, I don't know how, but like we were like, Nicholas, is that a great idea? Like maybe don't. He was like, it'll be fine. He just lit up a cigarette, and I was like, oh, good, great. But it was miraculously okay. So yeah, my worst field story is that several people drank gasoline by accident because of improper storage and us being dummies.
Yeah, these are the stories that are really like, what other career path would you be in? These are things that happen, and that are kind of like, you know, I can see this happening.
Yeah,
like I'm sitting here, like I'm laughing, but I'm like, you know, yeah, that totally would happen. Like, makes sense, especially lighting up a cigarette afterwards. Like,
oh yeah, because he was like, oh, this is awful, I need a cigarette, and we're like, no, it's awful because it's flammable. But fine. But yeah, my reserve story is also from Shalatrena, and it's not so much as like a worse story. It's just like I was not thinking straight. It's probably not. I rescued a bat, and because it got into our trench. And I, at the time, did not even think that I could get bitten by the bat and get rabies. It was not going through my head at all. I was just like, I need to save this bat. It has a little baby. It's holding on to it. It's a mama bat. It's very cute. And I was just like in there, like with like no gloves, just like, you know, picking it up, throwing it up, and like trying to put it away. And then only like half an hour later, I was like, oh, that was a really bad idea. Like that was like a really bad idea. And I think the worst part was that I didn't get like a rabies booster or shot or anything.
So that's how I had a tree frog jump in my mouth. Was trying to, we actually had a porta potty on site. It was only because the property owners own a porta potty company. So we actually had to have facilities, which was great because you'd pull up to site and the mosquitoes would ting off the van. So there's nothing like having to use the woods as your facility when you melt your plastic artifact bags with the amount of DEET that's on your skin. Like you'll write on them and then you like put this stuff in, you realize you melted a hole in the plastic bag because of how much DEET's on you. So porta potty had gotten cleaned and I go to use the facilities as you do. And there's a nice little tree frog on the inside of it. And it has that chemically bleached smell. And I'm like, oh God, it's supposed to be like 110 today. You're just gonna like bake in this and get like high and gross and you're gonna die. So I'm like corralling this little guy in the wall. I'm like, come here, little buddy. And I can't keep my mouth shut when I'm talking or like ever. And the thing jumps out from my hands and directly into my open mouth, suction cupping to my teeth and my gums. So I had to pull him off of me.
No.
This is my also first field experience in Florida. So I had no clue if tree frogs were poisonous or not in Florida. So I walk back, like hike down the site and I'm like just wiping my mouth, like kind of freaking out. And I go to my like supervisors and I'm like, are tree frogs poisonous here? And everyone's just kind of like looking at me as I'm like spitting and like grime and like scooping things out of my mouth. And they're like, no, what's wrong? I was like, one jumped in my mouth and I don't know what to do. And they're like, you're fine. It's okay. And that poor tree frog was in the porta potty the next morning, like floating. So
oh no,
he did not make it out. I was not able to rescue him, but I tried. I tried.
Rest in pieces.
Tree frog. So we're at the point where we're our last question, which is our big one. And that is, how do you think that archaeology can help save the
major
world?
benefits for me, and you know, in my opinion, of archaeology is that it makes the world livable. It lets people, you know, engage with and learn from the past and both find and reinforce their identities. And it, you know, in many ways, it gives a lot of people the strength to kind of face a volatile and aggressive world with the strength of past communities and ancestors behind them. And that's something that I think is extremely powerful and should be what archaeology is attempting to do. But I also was thinking that I don't necessarily think archaeology is something that will or like needs to save the world, in the sense like that it's essential to, like, I don't know, solve the climate crisis or something. Because it's not, like, archaeology is not essential for many things. It's essential because I love it, but it's like, I'm not going to sit there and try and argue and say like archaeology is what is going to solve all political crises in the world. Like, it's not. But I think it's one of many small moving parts within this kind of growing interdisciplinary effort to mitigate many of the problems that we currently face, whether that is, you know, social-political unrest or climate crisis issues, or, you know, decolonial / post-colonial / anti-colonial type work. I mean, it's all of it is it's a small part that only enriches the struggles and fights of other people, or rather should only enrich. There are unfortunately many situations where it doesn't. But yeah, I think that it's something that archaeology is very much, it's just enjoyable and fun. Like, it it's both like fun and people are like, oh yeah, cool, archaeology, but also it does have a more serious side, and it has very serious consequences and has had very serious consequences for quite a long time. You know, and it's important that when we think about, you know, how can archaeology save the world, like also I try to think about, okay, well, how is it like destroyed the world in some ways too? Because, you know, there's this kind of fundamental question, you know, is archaeology worth saving? It's the same thing where we think about like, are museums worth saving? At this point, don't know. I mean, I've worked in a museum, love museums, but I keep continually finding myself going, man, I think it's just not happening, and it doesn't need to. So I find myself like more and more, and this is like, I'm going to go into like a tiny rant, but like more and more, like every time I go to a museum, I find myself coming away feeling worse than I went in. And it doesn't matter what museum or how great it is, there's just always things that I'm like some museums, it's horrible. And like, I'm just like, this is bad. And I write angry letters, but that's because I'm just like, these are bad things and you shouldn't be doing them. Other museums, all the best intentions and great things in the world. And I'm just like, still don't feel great. And why is that? And then kind of dealing with that, like, unsettled feeling is something that I'm wrestling with a lot with my position and my place in archaeology. And like whether I have the authority to even say like, yeah, archaeology can save the world. Like archaeology is, you know, everyone should do it and everyone should love it, because it's not the case. There are people who have every right to not want to have anything to do with archaeology. So that's my slightly soapboxy moralistic take on that, I guess.
No, I love the soapbox. And I think you're right. I think archaeology can help in certain instances, help change small worlds. It's also a really great hook for people to then learn more, because you'll start about archaeology and then you can dive into more complex conversations. And I think like going forward with archaeology, we really need to figure out what places we want to be in and what places we should not be entering on our own, or how we should communicate to be invited into certain worlds.
Like vampires.
Yep. Yeah.
Archaeologists are just vampires. Extractive, exploitative, sucking things out, need to be invited in, can't see us in a mirror.
I was gonna go like, depending on the side of archaeology, you're either really, really pale or really, really tan. Like there's probably has some sort
something
of
here.
blood disorder to begin with from something that had bitten you at some point in your life. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, I like that. The archaeologists need to be vampires. I think we need to be able to be invited into the worlds at which we want to try to help. Sometimes our information is not helpful, or it's not, if no one's asking for help, there's no reason why. Yeah, no, I love it. My cat loves it too. She's rolling around over here.
Love her.
Noticing the tail floofing up every once in a while. So for our now final question, which is our bonus, which is just, what is keeping you sane during these times?
Well, I would say I'm generally not sane in many ways, but like one thing, like just like ultra nerdy and exciting, is that I recently finally after 29 years of my life started playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I had never before, and I'd always wanted to. And people had always been telling me like, oh, you'd be so great at it. You love theater, and you know, it's a lot of like theater stuff. And first of all, I didn't realize how much math was involved. Unacceptable. But I just use Roll20 because we're all online right now. So it calculates all that stuff for you, which is nice. But yeah, I went from like being like, oh, I don't know, like I don't want to be in the way or like annoy anyone because I have all these questions, to like now I'm in like 2 different campaigns and I'm just like, let's go. Like I'm like obsessed about like one of my characters because I just love her. She's amazing.
That's me. I've always wanted to get in Dungeons and Dragons and never really had like the opportunity. But there's also a role-playing game that I'm like mildly obsessed with that I want to try to get people more involved with. And we had started, but then the campaign fell apart. But it's called Alas for the Awful Sea. And you might like this. It's built in maritime folklore of like the British Isles and British folklore and archaeology, and I think it's an historian or archaeologist and folklorist who teamed up to create this, guided tabletop or not tabletop role-playing game that is about seafaring mythologies and things. So it had a really cool background. We had a really great game master, Brigitte Stevenson, who is a museum curator. And it was just so much fun. And I was nerding out because I was like, oh man, there's so much history and I'm learning things. And we had to like do the side research into like all these other like imports and exports into the British Isles during this era that we chose. And it was maybe a little bit too much of a nerd level of overlapping with interests and work, but it was a fun time.
I realized that my partner is actually in tutoring right now, so he cannot bring me a rat, but I want to go get a rat. So can I go hobble away with my crutch and get a rat? To answer your question also, so one of the other things that's keeping me sane is my rats. I got them during the pandemic because I needed friends. And this is Sophia. There, she's sleepy. I just woke her up. I feel bad, but that means she's chill. So
yeah.
What are you doing? Hi.
Oh my God, she's so cute.
I go closer to the camera. But yes, this is Sophia. She is a Dumbo Rex hooded rat, and she is about 300 grams and needs to be more. She's tiny. But yeah, I got her and her sister April of last year because I was like, this is going to be the long haul. Like, we're all going to be locked inside for quite a while. And I don't have anyone with me. I'm living on my own. I'm very isolated. I have always wanted rats, and I'm a financially stable adult right now. So why not?
Yeah, that is.
So now I'm a financially stable adult who just buys endless amounts of toys for their cage and makes them bespoke hand mixed food mixes and feeds them, only the best whole shelled nuts, and like they get everything. They're very spoiled.
Yeah.
And she's like so chill. It's because I took her out of her little pouch and I was like, let's go. She's like, okay, I'm tired.
Yeah, I feel like pets have been the kind of the lifesaver for lockdown situations. And I can understand. Yeah. There are definitely a few days where Lucia went to the vet and I canceled my doctor's appointments. So she gets the full front of the world here. Oh, this is the end I get. She just gives
this is the most chill I've ever seen either one of my rats, which is wild. So girl rats are insane and like never stop moving usually. So this is weird. I'm a little worried that you're not feeling good.
Just still sleepy.
Or just sleepy.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a perfect time we'll sign off here. I want to say thank you so much for playing along, and thank you for bringing in your guest. I'm excited. If you just saw my camera just shake, my cat just started slapping her feet at the computer screen here. So I want to say thank you again and tune in next time. Cheers. Yeah.